Does everybody want to be loved? I remember 5 years ago watching a YouTube video with Sean Stephenson, I believe. And he gave a talk inside of a prison. And he said that even the most aggressive people in prison wanted to be loved. But if this is so, why is it so difficult for those who are highly empathetic and consider themselves highly loving to get anywhere with some people? Let's just put it that way. Why does their love seem to be spurned? Is it not high enough quality love? There is, for instance, also a psychologist who talks of people whom she calls narcissists. And while I don't prefer that word, she states that love can't help these individuals change, except she says for one person she knows of who can pull this off. We've also heard the phrase, love makes the world go around. So what gives? Now, some ideas I've had are like the following. Somebody might be so pressured financially, so strapped to take care of their children, perhaps so low in income earning capacity, and have stigmas against them, and be all alone in the world basically, and not be able to get adequate help. And so what happens? Perhaps they're so angry, so bitter, so rageful, and so scared that they're looking for someone to dump this on, a target, so to speak. And the displacing, if you will, the dumping of the rage gives much more of a release than anything they could get back, called typically love. For what is, in many people's idea, love, but tolerance, biting your tongue sometimes, patience, a pat on the back, a word of hang in there, a smile, and so on. Maybe even gifts, so to speak, financially. But can any of that really transcend the magnitude of what some people are struggling with? Call it being massively unempowered too, and the rage therein over predicaments, including possible prison sentences or loss of their children or inadequate medical care. What can compensate for that? I also remember seeing videos to the effect of don't be kind, don't be nice. I think referring to dealing with such individuals. Whereupon, if one doesn't assure that there'd be huge consequences, the person might feel inclined to take a whack at the person from whom they deem there will be no significant consequences. For instance, if one sees a therapist and one has anger issues, so to speak, rage issues, some therapists might say, get a pillow and punch it, in lieu of doing that to a person. I don't think in the long run that's going to do any good. Probably will do the opposite of some good, in fact. But my thinking now is, the pillow is an innocuous victim, so to speak, in that it's not going to punch back. And aren't some people like that then? Some people very giving, very accommodating, very, quote, loving. They're handy targets for dumping on, just like dumping on that pillow, so to speak. The pillow doesn't punch back, it doesn't talk back, kind of like a dog or a cat. In fact, in a humorous note, I was shopping yesterday, and a woman of 25 had a t-shirt on that said, I love horses and dogs and maybe 3 people. Now at this point I would state though, in time such individuals might notice that the real McCoy, quote, loving person doesn't respond in kind. We might, if we have seen it before the movie, remember To Sir with Love with Sidney Poitier, where he was teaching in an inner city school. And they were quite amazed in time, at least as portrayed in the movie, how he didn't significantly react back as he was given, or at least the plot was trying to convey such a scenario. I have several things then to say. Perhaps such an individual at first might say, on meeting such an individual who doesn't hand it back to them, so to speak, like a pillow, so to speak, punched, is this person a fool not to see what I'm up to? And thus they're not reacting because they think they're guilty, so to speak, that they instigated it. Or maybe they're just so out of it that they don't even see what I'm doing. Or maybe, like a 5-year-old child, they're trying to test the individual to see just how far they can push the person to get away with displacement, but also to see what the person is made out of sheer curiosity. The more they think maybe this person is a real McCoy, quote, caring, loving person, the more they want to ascertain whether this is for real or not. Kind of like one of the movies on Mr. Rogers, in which a person was trying to test Mr. Rogers to see whether he was a real McCoy, doubting it at first, and concluding differently otherwise later on. I'd say this all the more in reference then to words I once read by Erich Fromm, who wrote, amongst other things, The Art of Loving. He said somewhere in his writings, at least, words to the effect that most people have never met someone capable of loving them. My interpretation now might be to notch this up just a bit, possibly, and say many people, or most people, have never met someone capable of understanding them. In other words, as per Christopher Plummer in the miniseries, second most popular miniseries in the country, The Thornbirds, saying to Ralph de Brigasor, an underling priest, I want to know what makes you tick. In other words, I want to understand you as best as possible, not just give you a comforting shoulder to cry on, or a smile from time to time, or an attaboy and so on, or a compliment, or hang in there, buddy. For if you think of it, a lot of us are inscrutable. We don't even know ourselves very well, oftentimes very well. So the rare person perhaps is the person who can understand what we can't even understand, like a Sherlock Holmes, or an Einstein devoted not to physics but to plumbing the depths of the human psyche, both their own and others. So to close, I'd have to say, why do not some people respond to our love? Well, what is it we mean by love? If it's simply giving people things or biting our tongue, I think that's a very low level of love compared to deep understanding of a person when they seek to understand themselves and can't conjure it up and can't find anyone else hardly to help them. A last point I might say, perhaps, is that perhaps people of a different socioeconomic group, a different level of IQ in certain respects, a different gender might say, how could they possibly understand what I'm going through? They're making probably too many assumptions. They're just, quote, too clueless to understand me. So any smiles, any gifts, so to speak, as per the Good Samaritan idea, being rather inadequate, they say. How could they possibly understand me? They might say thus, if I'm a woman, how could they understand women's issues? Especially if the person is a so-called executive-looking person and the other person is a woman of limited means in many ways, shapes, and forms. They might just state, this person can't possibly understand me, unless, of course, they're a people-based nuclear scientist or Sherlock Holmes. And then why would they even be spending time with me in the first place, they wonder. Kind of a catch-22. I'll finally close with words that jogged me to think a year ago or two when I heard them from a Buddhist monk. He's in Australia, Ajahn Brahm, with regard to certain people and his word dumpers and the dumping of certain things upon some. He said, let it in the top and out the bottom. I suppose, as opposed to reacting, it would have been interesting to hear him say that this is most best accomplished by having strong self-esteem, for lack of a better word, and low levels of fear in general of what can happen to us in life, and just understanding where people are coming from in general. In sleuth fashion, no matter who the other person is compared to who we are. These are my thoughts then on the topic of, is love enough? And what do we even mean by love? And is it being tested, in fact? Tested to see just to what extent we are the real McCoy, if we are even halfway there compared to many.